What's up, y'all? My name is Adam Argyle. I just had this huge article go out on HD CSS color. It's color level 4. We have new gradients, new color functions, all sorts of good stuff. I wrote this huge post, and I kind of wanted it to be like the Flexbox and grid guides that you find on CSS Tricks, like a reference point for you as you journey into HD CSS color. And what I'm going to do kind of uniquely here is go through it. I'm going to read it and talk about little side notes or little other thoughts that I have about what I wrote here to kind of bring more context to the article. This is probably going to be a decently long video, but it will be a very in-depth walkthrough of a very complex and powerful feature for CSS. So hang in there so you can read it at your own pace if you like, or watch this video to get the director's commentary or the developer's commentary on this stuff. So let me share this screen of the post. Hopefully that's decently large enough for folks to read. Let me zoom it in one more time. Sure. And let's get started on this. So the high definition CSS color guide landed on developers.chrome.com. You'll find a lot of these features are already in Safari. Some of them are in Safari Tech Preview, and almost all of them that are in this post are in Canary behind the web experiments flag. So if you want to try these things out, download Canary, pop open any of these demos, and we'll go through them there. And maybe I'll even pop open Canary and give some of these demos a thought, or probably will. Let's get started though, shall we? I grabbed this picture here, Creative Commons. It's like we're going from an old school type of color system. It's not quite black and white. SRGB isn't black and white, but it is 20 years old or more. And we're going to go into a new colorful future. The colorful future here is actually a lot more complicated than it sounds. And we're going to see some contention over the next few years as displays get better and better color quality, because we haven't reached maximum yet. So every year you're seeing new TVs, new displays, new phones, new iPads, things coming out with better display, better color support. And then we also have new color spaces coming out as people invent and create better color spaces for various purposes. So we're not done yet. If you're wondering if there's one color space you can just think of for the rest of time, I don't think we're there yet. We're going to shake these things out as time goes on and discover what we really need in the long term. So let's dig into it. So we have the high definition CSS color guide. CSS Color 4 brings wide gamut color tools and capabilities to the web, more color functions, well, more colors, manipulation functions, and better gradients. And those are definitely true statements. So my name is Adam Argyle. I work on Chrome DevTools and the Chrome browser. I'm on the Chrome team representing kind of CSS and UI. And let's dig into this post. So for over 25 years, SRGB, standard red, green, blue is what SRGB stands for. So that S is standard, has been the only color gamut for CSS gradients and colors with color space offerings like RGB, HSL, and hex. It is the most common color gamut capability amongst displays. It's like a common denominator. And we've grown very accustomed to specifying colors within this gamut. And that is made manifest here from the Web Almanac. And we can see the most popular color formats for web in 2022 was RGB with hex. So we've got the hex value here at dominating half of all of the market in terms of colors on the web. We have RGB, so that'd be the RGB function. We have RGBA, transparent and named colors. And then look at the trickle down as we get down here to, here's the RGB function, which is, look at it's only at 1% usage. It probably feels like that's the majority of you are working inside of that space, or hex values. Then we have hex with alpha, so that's an 8-character hex. HSLA, which has now been deprecated, RGBA, which is also deprecated. We have system colors, and then HSL is down here. It's down here at like 0%. This blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind that HSL is used this little. The good news is if you never got into HSL, now's a really good time to start learning LCH or OKLCH and kind of moving into the next color space, and you can kind of skip HSL if you want to. Depends. But anyway, look at this chart. Just hex completely dominating the color spaces that we use. And that color space is in the sRGB gamut. And it's one of those 20-year-old color spaces. Okay, so as displays become more capable of showing a wide range of colors, CSS needs a way to specify colors from within these wider ranges. The current color formats have no language for wide color ranges. If CSS never updated, it would be stuck in the 90s color ranges forever, forced to never match the wide gamut offerings found in images and videos. So in case you didn't know, images and videos can be in these wider gamuts. They have been for a while. So you can share an image that's in display P3. You can share a video that's got really high definition colors, and Chrome will play that. A lot of browsers will play that in the high definition range, while CSS, though, is trapped, only showing 30% of the colors the human eye can see. So sRGB can only represent 30% of what your eye can see. Thank CSS Color Level 4, though, for helping us escape this trap, written primarily by Leah Veru and Chris Lilly. Una and I are both on the Color Level 5 spec. I think we're also on the Color Level 4 one. Anyway, the majority of the work is Chris and Leah for sure. So I wanted to make sure they got a shout out here. And from Chrome 11 on, so this is coming very soon, is support for CSS Color Level 4 gamuts and color spaces. Chrome is joining Safari, who's had support for display P3 since 2016, and CSS can now support HD displays, specifying colors from HD gamuts while also offering color spaces with specializations. This guide will explain how you can start to take advantage of this new world of color. So I'm going to do a quick check to see if this posted well on Twitter to see if I can track any comments or questions that y'all have while this is going. Good, that'll do right there. Okay. Looks like no questions or comments yet. So here is one of the first images that I thought was really compelling here. This is going through a series of images, and they're shown transitioning from a wide and a narrow gamut. So if you look really closely down here, like I think I can even zoom in, see this little triangle as it grows and shrinks? That's showing you the gamut range that it's applying to the image. So the small triangle means you're kind of like in sRGB, and the larger triangle would be display P3. And look at this image quality. You can see a sort of washed out sun faded image becoming a vibrant image as you go into the HD range. And so some of these images, when they initially load, you're like, hey, that's pretty good. And then it pulls into the HD color range and you're like, well, now that's the color in the images that I want to see. So hopefully this is helping you kind of illuminate a little bit about like the vibrancy that you can get from these types of things. So then we have the next paragraph says, in supporting browsers, there's 50% more colors to pick from. Yeah, you thought 16 million colors sounded like a lot. Wait until you see how many colors some of these new color spaces can show. And also think about all those gradients that banded because there wasn't enough bit depth, and that's solved too. So less gradient banding, which if you've ever experienced that, can be quite unfortunate, and it is heavily reduced. So in addition to more colors, arguably the most vivid colors the display is capable of, this is an article written by Leah Veru. New color spaces provide unique tools and methods for managing and creating color systems. Yes. For example, before now we had HSL and its lightness channel, which was the best the web developers had. Now in CSS, we have LCH's perceptual lightness. This is much better. So in this particular image, we're showing lightness versus luminance. So each color space, HSL, has an L, and LCH or OKLCH have an L. So does Lab and OKLab. They have these L values, but one is lightness, and that's an HSL. And luminance is what we're going to find inside of the Scilab color spaces, which are, like I said, LCH, OKLCH. So on the left, we have 50% lightness across all these different colors, all these different hues. And they're very vibrant. HSL is very good at producing vibrant colors. But if we look at what the actual perceptual lightness is of those, they drastically range. Look at yellow is at 97% lightness in luminance, but even though its lightness says 50%. So there's kind of this mismatch between what HSL says a light color is and what we see as the luminance of that particular color. And some of these are just wildly wrong. Like look at 50% lightness is actually 97% luminance. Even in this blue, we have 50% lightness at 91% luminance. So before we had LCH and these additional color spaces, we were trying to manage lightness in HSL to give us a good color system. And it was pretty unreliable because of these drastic differences here. Your color contrast will shift as you change lightness in HSL because its luminance is different. So anyway, this is a confusing point. And also on the right here, we can see LCH looking quite unexciting, which might initially kind of turn you off from the concept of this color space. But the reality is this is reliable. When I put 50% into the L of LCH, I know that when I shift hue, I'm still at 50%, human perceptual lightness. So it's pretty I don't know, pretty cool, pretty compelling. Hopefully, if you're building a color system, you want that reliability. You don't want the vibrancy. So this is part of what we're going to learn in this guide is there's certain color spaces that you use because you want the vibrancy, and there's certain color spaces that you use because you want the reliability and the consistency. Okay, furthermore, gradients and mixing get some upgrades too. Hopefully you saw my color mix post. Color space support, hue interpolation options, and less banding. So the following image shows some of the mixing upgrades. The top two colors are mixed in sRGB, and the bottom two colors are mixed in display P3. Display P3 has more vivid colors, and the mixes result in complete black and white in the center. Whereas RGB looks a little desaturated in the center here. See how the black is definitely not, it looks like a really dark maroon, and the white here is a little blue washed. So sRGB looks a little desaturated and the mixes in the middle aren't completely black or white. So I don't know if it's coming through on the display here, but the colors on top here are using sRGB, just like it said. To me on my screen, these reds are a little bit more vibrant. This pink is definitely more vibrant. The mixes of these are certainly more vibrant. This red and this green are far more vibrant than this red and this green. Same with this yellow. This is a really nice yellow, and this one looks a little washed out. So sRGB just can't reach into some of those really rich dynamic displays of colors, and so it's just doing the best it can, whereas display P3 does have the language for it, does have the gamut support for it, and we see it reaching into the better properties of this display that I'm on. So kind of cool. The top two colors, I guess I just went over that, so we'll go into the next paragraph here, which says this guide will cover where color has been, where it's going, and how CSS will enable and support web developers to manage color. All right, the overview. Okay, so the problem with color in the web is that CSS is not high definition ready. While the displays most folks have in their pockets, slaps are mounted on walls, are wide gamut, high definition color ready. So it's like we have these displays all around our house generally, or in our workspace, but CSS is not high definition ready. So it's like we are, but it wasn't. The color capability of displays grew faster than CSS, so now CSS is here to catch up. There's much more than just more colors too. By the end of this article, you'll be able to specify more colors, enhance gradients, and pick the best color spaces and color gamuts for each task. Yes, I think that's an important lesson from this particular guide is that by the end, you have new tools in your tool belt. You'll know when to use which color space for what. At least I hope so. So what is a color gamut? This is a good place to start because I didn't really know what it was before I went down this huge research of studying colors. So hopefully my explanation of what a color gamut is can resonate with you. A color, well, let's see if there's any comments anywhere. Nope, good. Okay, a gamut represents the size of something, right? You can see gamut is useful outside of just the concept of color. The phrase millions of colors is really a comment about the gamut of a display or the range of colors it has to choose from. In the following image, 3 gamuts are compared, and the larger the size, the more colors it offers. So here's sRGB triangle, display P3 is triangle, and Rec 2020. You can see that they get progressively larger as a triangle shape. So what's also nice is a color gamut can have a name, like a basketball versus a baseball, or a venti coffee cup versus a grande. A name for the size can help people communicate. So learning these color gamut names helps you communicate and quickly understand a range of colors. This article will introduce you to 7 new gamuts, all with wider range than sRGB, and describe their different features to help you choose which to use. We have sRGB, RGB98, Display P3, Rec 2020, ProPhoto, Psi or CIE, and HVS, the Human Visual Gamut. So maybe you know which of these gamuts your laptop or TV offers. So when you bought a TV, it might have said complete Display P3 support or something like that. And maybe you knew or didn't know, but that's what they're trying to tell you is the range of colors this display can show. So let's talk about the Human Visual Gamut. HVG, color gamuts are often compared against the human visual gamut, the entirety of color we believe the human eye can see. HVS, HVG, human visual space, maybe? I can't remember. Hey, this looks like a little bug in my acronym. HVS is, or HVG is often portrayed with a chromaticity diagram. Did something happen? Looks like it's back. Weird, it just like stopped my thing. Okay, well anyway, hopefully it's back for y'all. Am I, yeah, it looks like I'm still live. Okay, whatever. So this is the chromaticity diagram, and I made it really simple. So at least I hope to make it simple. The big horseshoe that we see here is the human visual gamut. And then inside is a triangle that's representing the gamut of sRGB. So this is the gamut that we're currently using to specify all our colors on the web. It's this inner triangle. What we want is access to more of the human visual gamut. And that's what happens when the new iPad got dropped and they said more colors. They extended the ability to show this triangle. They went into a higher gamut range. So the outermost shape is what we see as humans, and the inner triangle is the RGB function drains, like the sRGB color space. So as you saw triangles above comparing gamut sizes, so will you find triangles later in this guide below. This is the industry's way of communicating about color gamuts and comparing them. So when you see this, and you'll see multiple triangles in some of them, they're trying to show you the range that each of these gamuts can produce. Okay, so that's what a color gamut is. It's the size of something. What is a color space? Color spaces are arrangements of a gamut, establishing a shape and a method of accessing colors. Many are simple 3D shapes like cubes or cylinders, and this color arrangement determines which colors are next to each other and how accessing and interpolating colors will work. So RGB is like a rectangular color space where colors are accessed by specifying coordinates on 3 axes. HSL is a cylindrical color space where colors are accessed with a hue angle and coordinates on 2 axes. So here we have a kind of little visual of that. We have an RGB cube, we have an HSL cylinder, and we can see how they've packed the colors inside of here. So while the gamut represents the almost like a flat view of all the colors, as spread out so that you can see them in a macro view, a color space is packing them into something so that we can access it and put colors next to each other and traverse through the colors. The level 4 specification introduces 12 new color spaces. So we just learned about a bunch of new gamuts, but now there's 12 new color spaces for looking up colors from the 7 new gamuts shared previously. These new color spaces are sRGB, linear, LCH, OKLCH, Lab, OKLab, Display P3, Rec 2020, A98, RGB, ProPhoto, RGB, XYZ, XYZ D50, and XYZ D65. We're going to go over all these. Don't worry, those should sound pretty foreign. And these are in addition to the 4 color spaces previously available: Hex, RGB, HSL, and recently HWB. So color gamut and color space summary. So let me just summarize this stuff because hopefully, or maybe that was really heavy. A color space is a mapping of colors where a color gamut is a range of colors. Consider a color gamut as a total of particles and a color space as a bottle made to hold that range of particles. This is why I have an interactive thing. It's like, here, imagine something with your brain. I'll provide an example here. So here's an interactive visual. What I mean: point, drag, and zoom around in this demo color space is filled with color particles. Then change the color space or color model, as they call it in this demo, to see a visualization of other spaces. Great. So here we're looking at the RGB color space. It's a cube. These are all the different named colors, or this is a bunch of really fun named colors. Shown inside of that color space. So the gamut is wide. We have, millions of colors, but then what we're doing is forming them into a cube so that we can access them with 3 channels, right? We have like X, Y, and Z. We'll find a certain color inside of the space. So let's change to LCH. LCH, look inside of there. That one's not a cube. It has this funky curved crystal shape. And the reason it's so funky in its shape is because it's modeled after our human vision, and our human vision is weird. Our human vision is not like a math shape. And so it turns out that this particular color space was packed specifically for humans. Kind of cool. Just like, and then we have HSL. You can see cylindrical. So there's our cylinder, our hue going there, and then lightness at the top and darkness at the bottom. Kind of cool. And all these different color models in here for you to check out. So these are cool for you to see the space visualized. It is a container. It's like a bottle holding particles. See, this one's a bottle holding particles. Or the other one was a crystal holding particles. Let's look at OKLab. OKLab is another size space one, so it has that same sort of crystal shape. Anyway, this demo was really cool. Really appreciated that that existed. So as a summary of a couple bullet points, we have used color gamuts to talk about a range of colors, like low range or narrow gamut versus high range or wide gamut. Use color spaces to talk about arrangements of color, syntax used to specify color or manipulate color and interpolate through color. So here we go. Now those particles that were just wildly sporadic and all over the place have been packed into this nice little cube and given an API for access. Okay, so how to access more colors, new spaces, and debug those results. CSS Color 4 outlines a bunch of new features and tools for CSS and Color. First, a recap of where Color was before these new features, then an overview of the new color spaces, syntax, and tools. The following CodePen shows all of the new and old color syntaxes together. This CodePen alone is a phenomenal reference. I use it myself all the time. It covers every single type of syntax that each color space offers, and that's good to know. There's a lot of different ways. CSS is flexible. There's a lot of flexible ways to access these colors. So we have hex, so a pretty normal looking hex. We have the 6-digit hex, the 3-digit hex, the 8-digit hex, the 4-digit hex. So these two have alpha. These two have alpha, and they're actually specifying alpha. That's why it looks semi-transparent here. All the different ways to specify white and hex, all the different ways to specify black and hex. RGB, so we have like kind of the legacy syntax with commas. We have a syntax without the commas. Anyway, there's all sorts of stuff in here. I'm not going to go through each of these because that would be pretty much a video all in itself. But look at, we have even new values here of none. You can specify that a channel is completely empty, which can be really meaningful if you don't want saturation or a hue to be involved at all. You know, kind of like making a gray color. You can be like, don't even think about the hue. Just manage the lightness or something like that. In terms of RGB, you can basically make red empty or something like that. So kind of cool. HSL, HWB, LCH, and a lot of these, eventually what you'll find is that we're trying to normalize to two different types of APIs, 3 channels, spaces in between of percentages, or 3 channels with decimals. So here we'll find, here, decimals. So it's either between 0 and 100. You're either asking for no power in that particular channel or full power from that channel. You can say full power with the value of 1. So here's 1 as lightness. Same thing as 100%, or 0, the same thing as 0%. So anyway, I'm going to skip by that stuff. We'll review that more later. Okay, so a review of the classic color spaces. Since the 2000s, you've been able to use the following for any CSS properties that accept a color as a value. You have hexadecimal, that's like hex numbers, RGB, RGBA, named like hot pink, or with keywords like current color. Around 2010, depending on your browser, CSS could use HSL. So HSL has been around for 13 years and usage is at like 0%. What is going on? I don't know. Then in 2017, hex with alpha appeared, and last, only recently, HWB started getting support in browsers. All of these classic color spaces reference color within the same gamut, SRGB. So remember, gamut is the amount of colors, and a color space is an arrangement of those colors. And so all of these different ways we've been accessing colors are color spaces for the same SRGB gamut. Let's talk about hex. The hex color, which is in every browser, look at that support chart, looks great. The hex color space defines RGB and A with hexadecimal numbers. The following code examples show all the ways this syntax can specify red, green, and blues plus opacity. So we have like 3-digit, 6-digit, 4-digit with opacity and stuff like that. Okay, we have RGB. RGB color space features direct access to the red, green, and blue channels. It allows specifying an amount between 0 and 255, or as a percentage, 0 to 100. This syntax was around before some syntax normalization was in the specifications, so you'll see comma and no comma syntaxes in the wild. Moving forward, commas are no longer required. So we have the classic here with commas between each of them. We have modern, which no commas, and then we have percents as like the super modern version here. And yeah, I find the percentages mean more to me. Like, I don't want to have to memorize that 255 is the maximum of the channel. It's easier for me to just think about 0 to 100%. So then we have the classics with opacity, just more syntax examples. And this last one is empty channels. Look, RGB, none, none, none. Kind of cool. Anyway, and then we have HSL, one of the first color spaces to orient itself towards human language and communication. HSL, hue, saturation, and lightness, offers all the colors in the sRGB gamut while not requiring your brain to know how red, green, and blue interact. Like RGB, it also originally had commas in the syntax, but moving forward, commas are no longer required. So we have classic here, 200 degrees, comma 50%, comma 50%. Modern version is HSL, 200, 50%, 50%. So you don't need to put degrees on there. It's implied because it's the H channel. Then you have percentages there, no commas. And you've got more syntaxes here. And then this introduction of the slash syntax. So you can say HSL, some color, slash, and then you can add the opacity at the end. So you don't need a whole separate function. You just need a slash. Kind of cool. And then here, down here, hueless and no saturations, right? None on the hue, none on the saturation. And then we have lightness either at 100%. So this is going to be white. Yep. Empty channels white, empty channels black. This could probably even be none here. HWB. So here's the support chart. Looks like it's in every browser now. Another sRGB color gamut space oriented at how, oh, that's because it was in Interop 2022. So thank Interop 2022 for HWB. This is another sRGB color gamut oriented at how humans describe color. It's HWB, hue, whiteness, and blackness. Authors can choose a hue and mix in white or black to find their desired color. I think this is a lot like how painters worked. They'd squeeze out a squeeze tube of some color, then they'd put black and white there, and they would mix them all together and create all these different colors based on that. So if that's how you think about color or like to interact with color, HWB is a pretty good space for that. Syntax offerings, just like HSL, I'm going to skip it. Okay, meet the new web color spaces. So enough of the history review. Let's jump into what's new. The following color, let's see if there's any comments here. No comments, that's totally fine. The following color space offers access to larger gamuts than sRGB. Right, that's like one of their gains, right? The display P3 color space offers almost twice as many colors as RGB, while Rec 2020 offers almost twice as many as display P3. That's a lot of colors. And here's our chromaticity diagram. I've removed the human visual gamut that was around the edge here and just isolated these particular spaces so that they can be compared to each other. And we'll go over that more. Rec 2020, which offers twice as much as display P3, is not very common right now. So display P3 is pretty common to find in displays, that they'll be able to cover the entirety of display P3 or close to it. Rec 2020, on the other hand, is like Ultra HD. This is folks buying a really massively expensive television, or maybe it's IMAX, something like that. Rec 2020 is like video teams and 3D rendering teams that are like really pushing color limits and wanting it to have high fidelity when they play it back. So Rec 2020 is a more futuristic, wide gamut color space. Well, it's a wide gamut and it has a color space. So anyway, it has both of them and it's big. So okay, let's talk about the color function. Look at that, no support really. Oh, we got it in Safari 15. So that's because they've had it for a long time. The color function was how you access display P3, and I think they've had support for display P3 since like 2016, something like that, through this color function. All right, let's talk about this color function. So the new color function can be used for any color space that specifies colors with RGB channels. So again, the color function is for anything that uses RGB. Color takes a color space parameter first, then a series of channel values for RGB and optionally some alpha. I think of the color function as a higher order function, and maybe that resonates with you, maybe it doesn't, but it's a function that basically calls other functions. It's a normalized function where you get to interface with it in one single way, and it will call all the different color spaces appropriately for you. So it's kind of like learn one, but reach many. Anyway, maybe that resonated with you, maybe not. Okay, you'll find many of the new color spaces use this function because having specialized functions like RGB, sRGB, HSL, HW was growing to be a long list, and it's just easier to have the color space be a parameter. So we have the benefits of this are a normalized space for accessing colors that use RGB, can scale up to any wide gamut RGB-based color space. So RGB as a channel offering as just red, green, and blue, even if it's 100%, each color space 100% can mean something different. So if it's a really wide gamut that you're asking for 100% in, that 100% is going to be more vibrant than something else's 100%. And we'll see that right here, down here. The cons of using the color function is it doesn't work with HSL, HWB, LCH, OKLCH, or OKLab. All of these are cylindrical color spaces that don't pass RGB. They pass a hue as an angle. And there is no green or blue. I think lab has blue. No, the B is not blue. It's like blue and yellow, depending if you go positive or negative. But anyway, so the color function doesn't work with those particular color spaces. So here's some new colors just for you to read and see. So we have an sRGB color here. We have color function, sRGB 111. We have down here sRGB linear, so we call the color function, pass that color space, and say 100% across the board. So it's going to be white, but 50% white in the sRGB linear space. Display P3, so we have display P3 here, 111, so that's maxing out each of these channels. This will be a bright white. Rec 2020 showing black here, color, Rec 2020 000, A98 RGB. So you can see that we're just calling the color function and then specifying the color space, passing 3 channels and maybe some alpha. It's a very normalized space. You only have to learn one new syntax and you can reach all these new gamuts. Kind of cool. So colors can be in the sRGB gamut, display P3 gamut, or the Rec 2020 gamut. up to and the Rec 2020 gamut has up to 77.6 of the visible spectrum. So that color function can reach all the way up into some pretty high, wide gamut ranges. Okay, let's talk about sRGB via color. So here we are looking at sRGB. This is our selected triangle. It's the one in the middle. It is the smallest. And again, sRGB is the one all of our colors are currently in. So this color space offers the same features as the RGB function. It does additionally offer decimals between 0 and 1, used exactly like 0% to 100%. So you get these new kind of channel values that can range a little bit differently. The pros of this is nearly all displays support a range of this color space. It's sRGB, right? This is what we've been supporting for a long time. And design tools will often pump out RGB values for you to use. The bummers are, it's not perceptually linear like LCH is. There's no wide gamut colors in this particular sRGB color function, and gradients often go through a dead zone. And we'll look at that later. So here's some usages, color function, specifying the sRGB color space, and some channel values. Lots of good stuff there. Okay, linear sRGB. Let's learn about this color space. It's still sRGB. This linear alternative to RGB offers predictable channel intensity. So the pros are it's direct access to the RGB channels. This is handy for things like game engines or light shows because you can easily turn off or on an RGB color light or something like that, because the way that it works is direct access. There's nothing trying to pad the arrangement of colors towards human interaction or anything like that. This is something made specifically for just direct access to the brightness of a light. So the cons are it's not perceptually linear, and black and white are packed at the edges. And we'll see that. We're going to look at the gradients that this linear sRGB produces, and I don't know, they're different. And I don't find them particularly helpful. But again, I think the pros here are if you're doing something like building a game engine where you really need some kind of direct access to that hardware, this can be a good one for you. Okay, gradients, which are discussed later, but quickly, I wanted to show it's meaningful to see an sRGB and a linear sRGB black to white gradient just to illustrate their differences. Oh, good, I made a little gradient. So I was just telling you about that. Let's check it out. So here's sRGB. This is a gradient we would see just like today, black to white. But below it is the sRGB gradient, and look at how pretty much all of this color here is packed into this little space right here, and all of this white space here is packed into this end right here. So that's what I mean by like the blacks and whites are packed at the start and end of the color space, and it leaves a really long space of gray, which is just kind of awkward, in my opinion. Anyway, so we have LCH. So this is the first space of this post to introduce a syntax for accessing colors outside the sRGB gamut. So if you were sitting here watching going, enough of the history, enough of these color spaces, I'm here to learn about how to get colors into this new gamut. This is our first one, LCH. It is also the first space to make it very easy to create out of gamut color for display. This is because any size space colors, so size space is going to be LCH, OKLCH, Lab, and OKLab, are capable of representing the entire human visible spectrum. This is why you're going to see people investing in OKLCH and stuff like that, is because not only is this a reliable color space in terms of its luminosity and its L value, it's also of high value because it will age well. This will age, like we were talking about P3 versus Rec 2020. If you use LCH, you don't have to even worry about that. Well, I mean, you kind of do, but in the future, you can just go bump up your chroma values and things like that and reach into these higher, wider gamuts. And LCH and OKLCH can be the single color space that you use to specify colors in sRGB, Display P3, Rec 2020, and the entire human visual gamut. So this is a very capable color space. Anyway, we'll talk more about it. So this color space is modeled after human vision and offers a syntax to specify any of those colors and more. The LCH channels are lightness, chroma, and hue, hue being an angle like in HSL and HWB. Lightness is a value from 0 to 100%, but not like HSL's lightness. It's special. It's perceptually linear, human-centric lightness. So if you ask for a difference of 5% lightness in LCH, and if you did the same thing in HSL, you would get what you wanted from LCH. It would be visually 5% different as opposed to HSL, which would do a math difference in lightness. It's important that the way we want to speak about color and interact with color starts to get manifested through these different color spaces as they're a tool oriented for that particular language, for that particular manipulation you're looking to do. So chroma is similar to saturation, but it can range from 0 to 230, but it's also technically unbounded. So you could specify a color in LCH that's got chroma off the charts, and that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to represent that chroma. It could be an impossible color, but it's just a property of this color space is that chroma is unbounded. Again, it covers the entire human visual spectrum of colors. Um, and it's important. And it also can go beyond that in case we find something later. I don't know. So it's right. Look at all these color spaces and all these weird little features. Okay, so some pros of LCH is predictable color manipulation, thanks to being perceptually linear. Mostly though, see OKLCH. We'll find that that one is just slightly better. Uses familiar channels, right? We have lightness, chroma, and hue. These are kind of very familiar, and often has vibrant gradients. So if you're looking for vibrant gradients, like what HSL and HWB can produce, you'll find that LCH will often produce vibrant gradients as well. Sometimes they'll be overly vibrant, though, in ways that you don't want, and we'll go look at that as well. Okay, so a con though of this particular color space and any of the size spaces is it's easy to go out of gamut. We'll cover that a little bit later. Like, what does it mean to be out of gamut? What are the repercussions of doing so? And another con is on rare occasions, the gradient may need an adjustment middle point to prevent hue shift. So we'll talk about hue shift later as we look at gradients and we compare them, and we'll see that many of these gradients do weird things as they go from one color to the next, and we'll discuss that. So here's some colors represented in LCH. So we have lightness at 58%, we have chroma at 32, and a hue angle at 241 degrees. So shouldn't look too foreign if you've used HSL or the RGB function. We're still just calling a color function and specifying 3 channels. No big deal. All right, so warning, chroma. So again, another warning here is chroma can be a troublemaker, allowing authors to easily exceed a display's gamut. Be careful with high chroma values. So if you're writing these colors by hand and you're not using a color picker, it can be very easy to increment your chroma into a color request that's far beyond the display's capability. All right, let's talk about lab. Another color space made to access the side gamut. Again, with a perceptually linear lightness dimension, the A and B in lab represent the unique axes of human color vision, so red and green and blue and yellow. When A is given a positive value, it adds red and adds green when it's below 0. When B is given a positive value, it adds yellow, where negative values are towards blue. So the pros of this are perceptually consistent gradients. Yes, lab and OKLab, I find, make the best gradients. This is my personal opinion, and we'll see that later. Also, lab can represent a high dynamic range, right? It's a size color space, so it can reach into the entire human visual spectrum here. Then we have the cons are there are potentials for a hue shift, especially in lab, not as much in OKLab. And cons are it's difficult to hand author or guess a color when reading values. Yes, OKLab has this problem. Look, or just lab does, and OKLab. Look at this. So we have 58% lightness, -16, and -30. So then I have to be like, oh, what was the first one? It was red and green. So if it's a negative value, it's going towards green. So this is a little greenish and a little yellowish or something. I don't know. This is really hard for my brain to imagine what color this is. So I imagine if you do work with lab or OKLab, you're going to be converting these using some sort of tool. Anyway, let's move on to OKLCH. So this space is corrective to LCH. And like LCH, L continues to represent perceptually linear lightness, C for chroma, and hue, or H for hue. This space feels familiar if you worked with HSL or LCH. Pick an angle on the color wheel for H, choose a lightness or darkness about by adjusting L, then we have chroma instead of saturation. They're fairly identical except that adjustments to lightness and chroma tend to come in pairs, or else it can be easy to ask for high chroma colors that go outside of a target gamut. So in HSL, you can drag the saturation value and keep your lightness the same and just simply see the color get more vibrant, more saturated. And you nearly have that experience with LCH and OKLCH, but it's slightly different in that if you bump up the chroma, you will get a more saturated color, but you might find it doesn't get brighter. Or it's hard to explain, where you're going to have to go adjust your lightness value to kind of find yourself or discover the color that you're looking for. So anyway, there's a relationship between lightness and chroma that doesn't exist when you're working in HSL lightness and saturation. Those feel more independent in HSL, and in LCH and OKLCH, they feel related. So anyway, the pros of OKLCH is there's no surprise when working with blue and purple hues. This is, the corrective nature of this OKLCH color space is corrective to where LCH does have issues with blue and purple hues. So you won't find those in the OKLCH space. It is perceptually linear lightness, awesome. Another pro is it uses familiar channels. It has high dynamic range, and it has a modern color picker by Evil Martians. If you haven't seen this color picker, it rocks. Let's just go check it out. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to enable show rec 2020 down here. So we have P3 and rec 2020. It's telling me that my color that I've chosen is in the SRGB gamut. Nice. And yeah, we want OKLCH, not LCH. So when we're looking at this here, we see lightness displayed here. Notice how they've even kind of cut out some of these things. And there's even, if you can see in here, there's a couple of lines. And if I drag this line to just inside this first box, you can see that our crosshair has just exited this triangle and gone into the next triangle. Now we are in the display P3 color space. And if I continue to drag this to the very edge, I'm now in rec 2020 color space. And that's how they're helping you see these things. So lightness in this particular scenario, if I drag it all the way here, I'm out of gamut. Look, my lightness is going outside of even rec 2020's gamut. This color space can't represent a color that's that light with that amount of chroma. So if we pop back out, we can adjust our chroma here and see us acquire more light colors and more dark colors. So right, the higher the chroma, the less colors are available to represent that. It's just kind of nice to see that this chroma has this option though, and we can see the relationship as we change one channel as it affects the others. So here's our chroma diagram here too. We can see that we're in the blue space, and look at this particular hue we're at is actually lacking a lot of color. Look at that cutout all right here. Whereas if we go to green and pink and this particular blue hue range here in orange, we have a lot more vibrant colors to choose from. At least in, so this is the display P3 cutoff is this first one, and rec 2020 is the second one. Look at how much more colors we get in rec 2020 in terms of like a bright chroma. Look at all these greens. Rec 2020 is offering a massive additional amount of green and blues. Just pretty cool stuff. And then look down here. Oh, it's funny. So we have the hue thing here. It's saying, hey, with that amount of chroma, you're limited to this one hue. And thank you, Tool, for helping me out with that. We can also see over on the left, they've got this thing that says Rec 2020 is unavailable. So like this display I'm on can't support Rec 2020. If I did find a display P3 color, though, it would say you're in that range. So here, let's pull that down into here. P3 is unavailable on this device. Ah, that's because I'm in Chrome Stable. If I was in Chrome Canary, it would show me the display P3 color here next to the sRGB color, and we would see a comparison of their vibrancy, and it would be really nice. So anyway, this color picker is very cool, very modern, has lots of great features. It's a great place to go feel out the OKLCH color space across the P3 and Rec 2020 gamuts. Awesome, great color picker. Well done, Sitnik and Co. You did a great job. All right. The bummers of OKLCH, though, easy to go out of gamut. I know I've been warning you about that. New and relatively unexplored. It's very new. It's so new. This color space actually just came out a couple of years ago. So we have a lot of exploration to do to figure out what it's good at and what it's bad at. And that's a con, right? These sort of unknown territory in some ways. And there's not very many color pickers. I mean, we saw one, and that was a rad one. But if you go into Figma, you go into Sketch, or whatever it is that you're opening up, they're not going to have a color picker for OKLCH yet. It's kind of sad, but hopefully we'll get there when designers are picking colors from these better color spaces too, using a similar tool like we were just looking at. Anyway, here's specifying color in OKLCH. I will note something that's not in here. This is a good director's cut commentary. The LCH and OKLCH functions have the same name almost, right? OKLCH and LCH, the functions start the same. The lightness value is the same, but the channel values are not. Notice that the channel values in OKLCH are decimals. So we have chroma here at 0.1. If we did that chroma in LCH, it would be an integer like 30 or 50. But here in OKLCH, they're decimals only. So when you're converting from LCH to OKLCH, it's not just a function name change. You will need to do some conversion. The color space OKLCH did make changes that were big enough to necessitate a channel value API change. So anyway, that's a pro tip for you right there. OKLab, this space is corrective to lab. So just like OKLCH, we have OKLab. It's claimed as a space optimized for image processing quality, but also, which for us means CSS is better, means gradients and color functionality manipulation quality. So we get better gradients and color manipulations out of OKLab than we do out of lab. And I find this to be true. The spec, I think it'll have it in here. Oh yeah, look, pros. This is the default space for animations and interpolations. If you make a new gradient and this new syntax, which we'll check out, the default is OKLab. And it's also the default for animations, and it's also the default for color mix. So color mix, gradients, and animations, if you're using any of the new color spaces, they will default to OKLab. OKLab also features perceptually linear lightness. It doesn't have any hue shifts like lab, and its perceptually consistent gradients are awesome. This is a really big superpower. We'll see that later. Cons, though, new and relatively unexplored, and few color pickers. Notice that there isn't a cool one here from Evil Martians for an OKLab color picker. That's okay. No shade thrown. It's going to be a while until we have color pickers for all these different features. And here's specifying colors inside of it. So just like the way we had A and B in lab, negative values and positive values indicate, more or less red and green, or more or less red and blue, or blue and yellow. But again, we have decimals here instead of integers. So kind of cool. Display P3. So here we are into our next larger gamut and color space. Display P3, notice how much larger it is than sRGB there in the center. Colors are in the Display P3 gamut, which can show 45.5% of the visible spectrum. The Display P3 gamut and color space have become popular since Apple supported them in 2015 on their iMac. Apple also supported Display P3 in web pages since CSS in 2016, 5 years ahead of any other browser. If coming from sRGB, this is a great color space to begin working with as you move styles to a higher dynamic range. The reason I like this as a good stepping stone for sRGB, or just the RGB function, is that it still takes RGB channels. So if you're in RGB and you had 255 as one of your channels, in Display P3, that would just be a value of 1. You're maximizing the power of red by specifying 1. And so you can kind of convert over into Display P3 really easily and start showing wider gamut colors right off the bat, which is kind of cool. So pros, great support, considered to be the baseline for HDR displays. You'll often see that, like, oh, our cool HDR display covers 95% of Display P3 or whatever. And you're like, okay, now you know what that means. They also has another pro of Display P3, 50% more colors than sRGB, and DevTools offers a great color picker. So you'll see DevTools has some cool color pickers for this stuff. Cons, though, will eventually be surpassed by Rec 2020 and SciSpaces. So Display P3 is probably going to have a future like sRGB, where it'll eventually be looked at like a downgraded, older gamut. That's just what's going to happen. Eventually, we're going to have displays and monitors that can show the entire human visual spectrum. And so this can only show half of it. It's going to look like it's half as good as the rest. So it will eventually die out. It'll probably take 20 years or more, but we'll see. Okay, Rec 2020, browser support. Here it is in this green triangle here. Look at that. Definitely the second largest of the color spaces and color gamuts that we're going to look at here. Colors in the Rec 2020 gamut cover 77.6 of the visible spectrum. And Rec 2020 is part of the movement to UHD TV, ultra high definition television, providing a wide range of colors for use in 4K and 8K media. Rec 2020 is another RGB-based gamut, larger than Display P3. Notice that, look at this. Okay, this is like a clutch thing to think about here. Rec 2020 is still RGB. Display P3 was RGB. RGB is not a bad color space. RGB has nothing to do with wide or narrow gamuts. It's just a method of specifying points inside of a color space. So RGB, if you're trying to internalize something right now, don't internalize RGB as bad. RGB is very capable of wide gamuts. It's just the color space that you're asking with those red, green, and blue channels that may or may not be limited in their capability. So Rec 2020 is RGB, so just like P3, but it has that higher potential. And it's larger than the Display P3, but not nearly as common amongst consumers. Okay, so the pros are it's Ultra HD. So if you're looking for some Ultra HD colors, you want to support the brand new latest and greatest displays and really have the colors on your site pop, Rec 2020 is going to make the sRGB color space look really washed out. It's going to be really impressive. You'll be able to, someone will load that on there and they'll be like, this is like glistening. It's so glossy and shiny and nice. And anyway, so then the cons, though, it's not as common among consumers yet. And it's not commonly found in handhelds or tablets. So here's using some of that. You call the color function, pass the Rec 2020 color space, and then 3 channels for RGB. We have percentages and decimals, or you can specify none. So that's Rec 2020. Now we have A98 RGB. So here it is in this blue triangle here. The colors in the RGB 98 gamut are 52.1 of the visible spectrum. Short for Adobe 1998 RGB, A98 RGB was created by Adobe to feature most of the colors achievable from CMYK printers. It offers more colors than sRGB, notably in the cyan and green hues. Notably, most of these additional, like larger, wider gamuts do provide more cyan and green colors. We saw that when we were just looking at the Evil Martians color picker. So the pros, it's larger than sRGB and it's larger than Display P3, interesting. The cons are, though, it's not a common space worked within by digital designers, right? It was based on print, so not many people are kind of converting from CMYK to digital. Oh, look, not many people are porting palettes from CMYK. So if you are, you're probably going to fall in love with this color space. If you're not, you can probably ignore it. ProPhoto RGB. This is our largest triangle on our little diagram here. Colors in the ProPhoto gamut cover 90% of the visible spectrum. Pretty sweet. So this was created by Kodak. This wide gamut space uniquely offers ultra wide range primary colors and features minimal hue shifts when changing lightness. It also claims to cover 100% of real world surface colors, as documented by Michael Pointer in 1980. That's kind of cool. So the pros are it's minimal hue shifts when changing lightness. It has very vibrant primary colors. The cons are around 13% of its colors that it offers are imaginary, meaning they're not within the human visible spectrum, right? We have imaginary colors. How weird is that? What a fun concept. Again, you specify colors in the ProPhoto range because it's RGB with the color function, ProPhoto RGB, and then 3 channels for the amount of intensity that you'd like to come out of there. Pretty sweet. All right, let's talk about XYZ, XYZ D50, and XYZ D65, the colors in the HVS gamut. This colors 100% of the human visual spectrum. The Psi XYZ color space encompasses all colors that are visible to a person with average eyesight. This is why it's used as a standard reference for other color space. Y is luminance, X and Z are possible chromas within the given Y luminance. The difference between D50 and D65 is the white point, where D50 uses the D50 white points and D65 uses the D65 white point. I feel like the word respectively should be here. You'd always read that like, respectively. Okay, key term, white point. Yeah, what's a white point? Maybe you're thinking, what is a white point? Let me answer. It's an attribute of a color space. It's where true white exists within the space. For electronic screens, D65 is the most common white point, and it's short for 6500 Kelvin. It's important in color conversion that white points match so color temperature, warmness, or coolness aren't affected. It's just a fun little editor side note. Notice it's Kelvin, like literally like temperature, and then we talk about color temperature, warmness, or coolness. It's kind of a cool line. It's not a mistake that they did that. So anyway, the pros of this color space: linear light access has handy use cases. So just like sRGB linear, we have linear access to the channels. It's great for physical color mixing. The cons are it's not perceptually linear like LCH, OKLCH Lab, and OKLab are. Another interesting side note about XYZ is it's often the common color space where colors are converted to and then converted out of something. So like if I want to go from LCH to display P3, it'll go LCH to XYZ, from XYZ to display P3. It's a big space with a nice white point and some linear values to it. So we convert all of these different color spaces to it and then go from it to something else. And that will persist a lot of the quality and a lot of the intention of the original color as it's converted to another color space. Cool. Lots of syntax suggestions. Hey, look at this. Looks like the mixin widget didn't render here. This is custom color spaces. So in color level 5, there's a path for teaching the browser a custom color space. So if all these new color spaces weren't enough and you're a pro and you know how to make your own, you can give the browser a new color space and ask for colors from it. So this is an ICC profile that tells the browser how to resolve colors. So you can create one like this. You have @color-profile-foo. So you're making a new color space called foo. The source of that color profile is a URL to an ICC file. And that's enough to teach the browser how to reference, how to get a color based on your syntax. So once loaded, access colors from this custom profile with the color function, right? Nice. And specify the channels for it. So we have a background, we have color in the foo color space with a maximum red and no green, no blue. So kind of cool. In the future, you can bring your own color space to your website and build your own website in your own color space. It could be called Adam's Fun Space, like whatever. You get to do whatever you want. All right, let's talk about color interpolation. Transitioning from one color to another is found in animations, gradients, and color mixing. This transition is typically specified as a starting color and an ending color, where the browser is expected to interpolate between them. Interpolate in this case means to generate a series of in-between colors to create a smooth transition instead of an instant one. With a gradient, the interpolation is a series of colors along a shape. With animation, it's a series of colors over time. So here's an animation we've got going from 0 to 100 to blue to white. We're going there infinitely. Oh yeah, and I updated my code pen. It didn't update the sample. So cool, there's a bug I should take a note of. But here we are interpolating between different colors, and you can see the interpolation over time. But whereas a gradient, we can see the interpolation all at once. So we get to see blue to white just straight up here in one. Oh, nice. Thanks for the super zoomy there. And it's just kind of interesting to have interpolation kind of exist like that. So what's new in color interpolation? Like we've already had the ability to do gradients and, and animate color. What's new? So with the addition of new gamuts and color spaces, there are new additional options for interpolation. Transitioning a color in HSL to blue from blue to white results in something very different from sRGB. Oh, look, here, we'll get into this. So we have a classic gradient and sRGB here. We have linear dash gradient to right, blue to white. Excellent. Then we have one here is a newer one, linear dash gradient in HSL to right, blue to white. Oh, look, I'm not in Canary. I should probably have Canary open on this article. Let's do that. But also, can't see the CodePen demo? I shared an image for you. So you don't have to have Canary to experience these things. But let's just look at the example here. So the top one was sRGB, blue to white, pretty normal looking. But look at HSL. What's HSL doing down here? Kind of looking all purple. That's a little strange. Why did it do that? So then what happens if you transition from one color in one space to a color in a completely different space? If you've been watching this stream long enough, you'll know that the answer is OKLab is the default. And so we'll get a gradient in OKLab. Oh, look, OKLab will be the common space. So we do linear gradient to right. We specify an LCH color and an HSL color. Ooh, browser, what are you going to do with that? And then we have one down here. We have linear gradient in LCH where we're specifying that we want it to be an LCH to right, and then we have LCH HSL. Okay, let's see, what does that look like? Excellent. So here at top, we had the OKLab, very consistent, reliable gradient here. And then we have the LCH one down here, which, like I was saying earlier, can produce more vibrant gradients. And maybe that's what you want. So we have the same colors, different color spaces. So you can see how it's changing the gradients. And I really like the LCH one, actually. It's really nice. Look at these colors packed into here. Look really good. This one's kind of going a little bit desaturated in the center, but this one just stays vibrant like the whole time. Oh, it's juicy. Okay, so lucky for you, the color force specification has instructions for the browser on how to handle these cross color space interpolations. It sounds like it should be the name of like a space book. In the above case for the dot gradient, browsers will notice the differentiating color spaces and use the default color space OKLab. So you may think the browser would use LCH as the color space since that's the first color, right? We had that colors like to right, LCH, and HSL. They might use the first color, but it doesn't. And that's why I showed a second comparison gradient, the LCH gradient. That's the LCH gradient is a gradient. Oh, look, a typo. Is a gradient from the LCH color space. So let me take a quick little note here on some of these bugs we found. So we had interpolation code example was old, and then we have a typo with .lch gradient. It's typed gradient. Cool. Love it. No matter how many times I've read this article, you can find little bugs, but we got them. Okay, so then let's talk about less banding thanks to 16-bit colors. So maybe someone is out there wondering, like, tell me about colors and bits and why do I, what took so long? Maybe they know about the math or the memory kind of behind these things. So before this color work, all colors were saved in one 32-bit integer to represent all 4 channels, red, green, blue, and alpha. This is 8 bits per channel, and 2 to the 24th possible colors, ignoring alpha, is 16 million colors. That's where we get that millions of colors, is by the way that we're storing the information, and then we can do a multiplication to see how many potential colors can be represented by those numbers. After this color work though, 4, so we were at 1 big integer, now we're at 4 16-bit floating point values. Floating point values, each channel has its own float instead of being lumped together. This is 64 bits of data total, resulting in many more than millions of colors, right? Very cool. So we've set ourselves up for a nice future with lots and lots of color. This work is required to support HD color. This increases the amount of color information that can be stored, which has a nice side effect of meaning there's more colors for the browser to use in a gradient. Gradient banding is when there aren't enough colors to create a smooth gradient and strips of color become visible. Banding is heavily mitigated with the upgrade to higher resolution colors. So we can see some banding here. You can see there's like a circle here, another band here, almost like a rainbow, but it's like a really light gray rainbow that kind of keeps going around. And the banding is fixed in a higher bit color storage. We just have more colors in between various colors. Okay, so let's talk about controlling interpolation. The shortest distance between 2 points is always a straight line. With color interpolation, browsers take the short route by default. Consider a scenario where there are 2 points in an HSL color cylinder. A gradient acquires its color steps by traveling along the line between the 2 points. So here's a linear gradient to right between 2 colors, and a simulation here, shows color 1 and color 2, and the gradient's just going to go straight through. It goes beep. And look at where it went. It went right through the middle, right through a very unsaturated space. So the above gradient line goes between the greenish color to the reddish color, passing through the center of the color space. While the above is great to help with initial understanding, it's not exactly what happens. Here's the gradient in the following code pen, and it's clearly not white in the middle like the mock showed, but still you should see some desaturation. Look, we went from vibrant to vibrant with some kind of muddy desaturated colors in the middle. The middle area of the gradient has lost its vibrance though. Yep, this is because the most vibrant colors are at the edge of the color space shape, not in the center, where the interpolation traveled near. This is commonly referred to as the dead zone, and there's a few ways to fix or work around this. So one way to do that is specifying more gradient stops to avoid the dead zone. A technique for avoiding the dead zone today is to add additional color stops in the gradient, then intentionally guide the interpolation to stay within the vibrant regions of a color space. It's literally a workaround, as the additional stops help it work around the dead zone. There's a gradient tool by Eric Kennedy that calculates additional color stops for you to help you avoid the dead zone, even in color spaces that tend to gravitate towards it. Using it, passing the same colors from the first example, but changing the color interpolation to HSL, it produces this gradient. So look at it, added a lot more stops, and all those stops guide it around the center. And now we get a gradient that looks like this. So with guided stop points, the interpolation is no longer a straight line, but appears to curve around the dead zone, helping maintain saturation, resulting in a much more vibrant gradient. Nice. So while the tool does a good job, what if you could have similar or greater control right from CSS, right? Also, look, there's like a yellow highlight there. Okay, detecting the or directing the color interpolation. In color 4, the ability to control the hue interpolation strategy was added and is a new way around, wink, wink, the dead zone. Think about a hue angle and consider a 2-stop gradient that only changes the angle, hue shifting from like 140 to 240, for example. So we've got like a blue to a purple. Looks really nice. Shorter versus longer hue interpolation. So the gradient will by default take the shorter route because the shorter route it can, unless you specify for it to take a longer route. Hue interpolation options direct the angle rotation, like telling someone to turn left instead of right, like Zoolander. He could only turn right, but it's like we've taught the browser to turn left. So the browser was Zoolander until now. So here's the short route, and there's the long route. Look, it goes all the way around, takes a long way. In the above visual example of hue interpolation distances, the short path and the long path are simulated to illustrate the difference. The short distance has less hues between it because it traveled through the least amount of distance possible, where the long distance will have traveled over more hues. Okay, so let's talk about increasing versus decreasing hue interpolation. There's 2 more hue interpolation strategies in color 4. They are exclusive for cylindrical color spaces. Staying within with the 2 colors from the previous examples, the visual now shows how increasing and decreasing works. So here's that shorter route. Here's the longer route. Look at all the hues we picked up along the way. And we have the increasing route and the decreasing route. So kind of cool. You can tell it which way to go around the circle. And there's a couple of keywords to help you direct it. So the above code pen used ColorJS to demonstrate the expected result. ColorJS is written by Chris and Leah. It's a very high fidelity colored JavaScript library. And so I use that to generate up that. If you actually zoom in, you can see that these are little strips of color. It's not actually a real gradient. Kind of a cool trick. Anyway, the CSS you would write to achieve the same effect without JavaScript library would be, so the longer hue interpolation, we have a linear gradient to write in HSL longer hue. Then we specify two HSL colors. So we say the direction, the color space, and the hue interpolation strategy. Then we have decreasing hue interpolation in CSS. So we have linear gradient to write in HSL decreasing hue. So we would get the multicolored gradient up here and the normal looking gradient down here. To close out hue interpolation, here's a fun playground where you can change the hue between two color stops and see the effect of hue interpolation choice, as well as how color spaces change gradient results. The effects can be very different. Consider this as 4 new tricks just went into your tool belt. Yes, so let's check this out. We've got this demo here. We can pick the colors. We can say how many steps are in it. Let's just keep it at kind of less steps. And then I'm going to turn on the hue interpolation here so we can see it in the cylindrical spaces, how it's different. And look at all the different hues it picked up, depending on the increasing or decreasing direction it went. Pretty cool stuff. And this tool is also fun. You can change. So here, if we go blue to white, we'll start to see some of those purpley color spaces, right? Nice. OKLab, though, not doing the purple. So we'll study that more later. And then it looks like longer and shorter didn't have much effect in that particular gradient. Oh, probably because it's going too white. So it's not crossing a bunch of hues as it goes there. If we did like red, yeah, there you go. See, look, now it's going the other direction around the color wheel to go pick up those colors. Kind of cool. So have fun playing with this, change the colors, change the amount of steps, and just see how all these different color spaces are dealing with your request to interpolate from one to the next. Okay, gradients in different color spaces. Each color space, given its unique shape and color arrangement, will result in a different gradient. So that's why the gradients are different. They had different shapes. Remember, it's like a cone, a cube, the crystal. And going from one point in there to another is going to cross different colors along the way. There's like a journey, and it's going to gather each color as it goes there. So look at the examples below, especially at blue to white. Look at how each color space handles that differently. Notice how many go purple in the middle. That's called a hue shift. Okay, so this one, I do have a screenshot of just blue, but I want to open up this demo in Canary right now and just kind of show it. Copy link address. Let's pop open a new Canary window here. Yeah. All right. Okay. So look, even black to white is pretty different across all these color spaces. Some of them have more lightness in the middle. Some of them are more kind of perceptually linear. Like look at OKLab and OKLCH. This is nice. Although it can be said that the really dark colors here start at about like 10%. And so maybe you're going to reach like a really dark black a little too early, whereas lab and LCH, they really close in that darkness at the very end. So there's kind of some really specific differences about, like, if you're making a dark mode theme, look at how these differences are here. OKLCH and LCH and lab and SRGB. It's like OKLab and OKLCH give you more range for a set of dark colors, but at the cost of you're not going to be writing a really low lightness. It's like if your lightness was at like 0, which would be the far left edge here, even at 5, you might still be nearly black. So you're going to have to go from 5 to like 10 to 15. And there's going to be a range there that's going to be really subtle. It's going to give you a lot of results. But it's not going to be as subtle as LCH, where like that 0 to 5% range is going to be massively different, as they packed a lot of that darkness there at the beginning. Let's look at red to white. Right, okay, some of these do some weird stuff. LCH going pink, HSL going completely dead in the center. That confuses me. HWB, though, not so much. Blue to white, this is a famous one because so many color spaces start to show their shape when you ask for this one. Going purple. SRGB doesn't go that purple, but if you compare it to OKLab, it definitely goes a little bit purple, whereas this one stays really blue, almost goes through a cyan kind of color space, and this one's, there's definitely some purple in here. I see it. All right, cool. That's that one. Blue to black. Look at these. Interesting. So this is what we get today, SRGB at the top, and then these are all of our new future options and our new default. So OKLab is the new default. SRGB is where we came from. Cool stuff. Red to green. Again, HSL and HWB staying very vibrant. They're very good at staying vibrant in their gradients, whereas OKLab is, kind of consistent. And look at SRGB, got really dark in the center there. It's weird. Purple to gold. Look at HSL and HWB. You're like, wow, you're so bright. Thank you. And LCH, again, right? LCH can have some really nice results. In fact, in this particular example, going from purple to gold, I prefer LCH there. That looks great. And look at OKLab actually failing me and being really dead in the center. It really desaturated for like 80% of its travels. I really don't like that. Okay, blue to red. OKLab kind of, again, very uninteresting results, whereas LCH is like popping. It's popping right off the page. And that stayed great. I love this magenta in the middle. It's great. Another fun thing when you're looking at these gradients is when you use the color mix function, you're really just asking for a slice out of this gradient. So if you're going to mix blue and red, and then you say how much of a mix you want of both of those, you're essentially specifying which part of the slice of here you want, which is kind of cool. So in LCH, if you did a mix, you get a really bright pink in the center there. It could be cool. Short versus long way. Oh, I should probably update this because it only really works on the cylindrical color spaces. And here's me pumping up chroma really high. And we can see gamut clipping as it tries to fulfill my request. And it's just a little too high or wide gamut there for it. Anyway, okay, there's all sorts of good examples in here, and you can start to get a sense of which color space you like to do your gradients in. LCH is kind of doing really good on a lot of these. It's interesting, whereas in my experience in like using these, I find OKLab almost always produces what I want. But anyway, really interesting. Okay, let's go down here. So some gradients in these color spaces will be more vibrant than others or travel less through dead zones. Spaces like lab pack colors together in a way optimized for saturation, as opposed to spaces optimized for humans to write color, like in HWB. So here's a comparison. We have in to write HWB, we have another one to write in lab. Did I provide an image for that one? No. That's not that exciting. Okay, so the above demo, while subtle in the results, okay, the results are subtle. Let's check them out. Let's see, copy link address, go back to here. Let's check out this demo. What we got? Okay, so on top, we're looking at HWB, and on bottom, we're looking at, this is an OKLab. So since we used lab as our colors, and then the top one we used HWB, we got a different gradient. The bottom one is upgrading into the new OKLab default color space, and the top one is using sRGB, but the top one allowed us to write HWB colors, which is a lot more natural than LAB. Like LAB here, 30, 59.4, negative 96, that doesn't mean anything to me. So what this post continues to go on, it says the above demo, while subtle in results, does show more consistent interpolation with lab. Yep. The syntax of lab isn't simple to read, though. There's negative numbers that are very unfamiliar when coming from RGB or HSL. So the good news is we can use HWB for familiar syntax, but ask for the gradient to be interpolated entirely within another color space, like OKLab. So here we have linear gradient and HWB on top, and then we have linear gradient and OKLab, both using the same HWB color spaces. Let's pop this one open. Boop, boop, beep, boop. Boop, beep, boop, boop. Hotkey didn't work. Boop, beep, doop, beep. Oh, leave. All right. Okay, so the top one is in HWB. The bottom one is OKLab. Yeah, see, the top one has some extra vibrancy in the blues, a little bit of a cyan highlight right here. See that little highlight? And then OKLab down here looking really consistent. So again, HWB colors specified on both sides, same colors. We're just seeing the difference in the color space that these are being interpolated inside of. Cool. Oh yeah, here, look, this one's got an image. Great. So this example uses the same colors in HWB, but specifies the color space for interpolation to either HWB or OKLab. HWB is a great color space for high vibrance, but possible dead zones or bright spots. Right? You see the cyan hotspot there? OKLab is great for perceptually linear gradients that stay saturated. Except we saw a couple examples about a minute ago that weren't so saturated, but whatever. Okay, this feature is a lot of fun as you can try on a few different color spaces to see which gradient you like best. So here's a CodePen experimenting with gradients and color spaces, mixing, matching strategies, even a transition to black to, I think that's the same demo we had open earlier. Yeah, so there's an example of the black to white gradient though, which is pretty drastically different across all the color spaces. Let's talk briefly about gamut map clamping. How much time have passed? It's a lot of time. Gamut clamping. There exist scenarios where a color may ask for something outside of a gamut. Consider the following color, RGB 300. Woo! The maximum for a color channel in the RGB color space is 255. But here, 300 was specified for red. What happens? Well, gamut clamping. Clamping is when extra information is just simply removed. 300 will become 255 internally to the color engine, and the color has now been clamped within its space. Choosing a color space. So many folks, after learning about these color spaces and their effects, feel overwhelmed and want to know which one to choose. From my studies and experience, I don't see one color space as the single one for all my tasks. each has moments where they produce the desired outcome. We've already seen that. I've already told you I prefer OKLab for my gradients and OKLCH for specifying my colors, but I've already seen today multiple instances where LCH was producing a better gradient. So there is no surefire way. Here, look, if there was one best space, then there wouldn't be so many new spaces being introduced. We wouldn't be innovating in color space world, getting new color spaces like 2 years ago like we did, if there was some single color space to rule them all. It doesn't exist yet. And again, it comes back to the beginning of this video where I was talking about the tension between like capabilities and syntax and color spaces and all this stuff. It's still kind of new and mixing together, and we're going to have to shake out how we all have this relationship between like hardware having the capability and us being able to specify colors in it. However, I can say that size spaces, lab, OKLab, LCH, and OKLCH are my starting places. That is true. If the outcome of them isn't what I'm looking for, then I'll go test other spaces. For mixing colors and creating gradients, I agree with the default spec choice of OKLab. For color systems and overall UI colors, I like OKLCH. Here are a couple articles where folks have shared their updated color strategies, giving these new color spaces and features. For example, Andrei Sitnik, who's also the Evil Martians member, has gone all in on OKLCH, and maybe they'll convince you to do the same. So here's their article about why they moved from HSB and or RGB and HSL to OKLCH. We have a post by Josh Camo for color formats and one by Chris Coyer. He goes, okay, OKLCH, and talks about it there. Let's talk about migrating to HD color. So you probably have all your colors in hex and RGB, and maybe you want to use these new color spaces, and you want to migrate your code, all your color code, to HD CSS color. Let's talk about some strategies. There are two main strategies for updating your web project colors: support wide gamut displays. There's definitely other strategies. You could use post CSS plugins. There's probably conversion tools. There's a lot of other ways to do it, but I'm going to talk about two main strategies. I guess those would be tactics. Using post CSS would be a tactic. I want to talk about strategies. So we have graceful degradation and progressive enhancement. That should not be a very surprising two set of strategies. Okay, so if we use graceful degradation for migrating to HD color, we're going to use the new color spaces. We're just going to use them. Right? It's graceful degradation. And we're going to let the browser and operating system figure out which color to show based on display capabilities. So you could start making entire websites using only OKLCH, asking for colors from Rec 2020 and the entire thing, basically making a website that's preparing for 2030 or something like that, or 2025. And then as these browsers visit your site that don't support Rec 2020, they will naturally clamp at what they can show. They'll say, oh, this person asked for Rec 2020 super blue. Oh, well, here's my super blue that I can show. And so each user that visits your page will get a clamped version of it. But as users visit your pages, they get better displays, so will they get a better color. Graceful degradation. You've asked for the best color, and you're willing to let the browser pick up what it can, something lesser. Then you have progressive enhancement. So you can use @supports and @media to assess the capabilities of the user's browser. And if certain conditions are met, provide wide gamut colors. So, right, you can progressively enhance. You have a good SRGB base, and then you're going to build up to HD colors based on capabilities of your particular user and the parsing capabilities of that browser. So, for example, if a browser doesn't understand display P3 color, and you wrote color red, and you had display P3 right underneath it, it would just use red. But if the browser does understand display P3 color, then it won't use the red and it will grab the color. This is a technique that we've had back in the day from all sorts of things that you want to upgrade to. You can provide the regular standard experience first, and then as a second property list the one that you actually want, and if the browser understands it, it'll use it. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each, and so here's a quick list of pros and cons for these strategies. Graceful degradation. The pros, this is the simplest route. I mean, you don't have to juggle anything. You're just specifying colors one time. It's very simple. The browser will gamut, map, or clamp to the sRGB if not a wide gamut. Therefore, the responsibility is on the browser. That's why it's simple. You gave up the responsibility. You said, I'm asking for a super vibrant color. You do what you can. I'm cool with whatever you got, browser. Cons, though, the browser may gamut clamp or gamut map to a color you don't love. That's true. The browser may not understand the color request and fail entirely. However, this can be mitigated by specifying the color twice, letting the cascade fall back to the one it doesn't understand, just like we should. So you can mitigate that with that technique up above. So you're still asking for super colors, but you're providing one for it to fall back to pretty simply. Okay, then we have progressive enhancement. The pros of this are more control with managed color fidelity and an additive strategy that doesn't affect the current colors, right? So you're just building up towards this, which is nice. The cons are you need to manage 2 separate color syntaxes, maybe more. And the cons are you need to manage 2 separate color gamuts, maybe more. For now, though, we're going to be in pretty much display P3 and sRGB land. You don't have to worry about Rec 2020 gamuts yet. Okay, so how do we do this? Let's check for gamut and color space support. So the browser allows checking for support for wide gamut color capabilities and color syntax support from CSS and JavaScript. Both of those can access and ask the browser what it's capable of. The exact gamut of colors the user had is not made available though. A generalized answer is provided so user privacy is maintained. The exact color space support is made available through the exact color space support is made available though, as it's not specific to capability of the user's hardware like a gamut is. So color gamut support queries. The following code examples check the visiting user's range of colors in the display, so you can check it from CSS. The least specific support query is the dynamic range media query. This is the one I tend to use. And look at the browser support, very good. So you have app media, dynamic range is high. It's safe to use HD colors. Okay, approximate or more support can be inquired with the color gamut media query. So we have color gamut SRGB, color gamut P3, color gamut Rec 2020. So the one above dynamic range just says, is it HD capable at all? Like it could be UHD, Ultra HD or not. You don't care. You're just saying, is it HD? The down here, the color gamut, you're asking specifically, can it support this gamut or not? There's 2 additional media queries for checking support too. So you have the app media color and the app media color index. Go check those out if you're interested. So you can also check this stuff from JavaScript using the window.match media function. Could be called past a media query for evaluation. So we've got has high dynamic range is equal window.match media. You pass your media query and then you get a Boolean back of the matches property and you can know if they are an HD capable display. Or you can ask specifically about color gamut P3 and see if it has P3 support. The above pattern can be copied for the rest of the media queries. All right, so then we have color space support queries. The following code examples check the visiting user's browser and its selection of color spaces to work within. So you can check from CSS. So the first one was checking about gamut support, what gamut's going to do. The next one is checking about color function support, color space support. They are 2 different things, and you'll need to double check both in order to sufficiently upgrade your colors in a progressive enhancement strategy. So right here we have supports background RGB. So this is just a regular RGB. So look, we're specifying a property and a value. We're using just a regular sRGB color, and the add supports will say, hey, I know how to put an RGB color in the background, and you can be like, cool, then I can go ahead and use RGB colors here. Here's another one, background color display P3. Does it understand color display P3? And if it does, then you can go ahead and use display P3 colors. So you can see how this would be combined with do they have P3 gamut support and do they have parsing support for this color space? And you'll need both, again, to do that. So here's checking from JavaScript. We can use css.supports function, and you can call it just like this. Same exact checks, just coming from JavaScript. So putting the hardware and parsing checks together, like I was just saying, while waiting for each browser to implement these new color spaces, it's a good idea to check for both hardware capability and color parsing capability. This is often what I use when progressively enhancing colors to high definition, very much so. I've been using this for a couple years, this strategy. So for example, like a neon example, I've got neon red, look, maximized red channel, neon blue, maximized blue channel in the sRGB color space. Is the display HD? So I have app media, dynamic range is high. And does the browser understand P3 colors? If it does, then I can change my custom property to use display P3 maximum R, display P3 maximum blue. Cool stuff. All right, debugging color with Chrome DevTools. Chrome DevTools is updated in Canary and equipped with new tools to help developers create, convert, and debug HD color. Updated color picker. So the color picker now supports all the new color spaces, allowing authors to interact with the channel values just as they always have. So here's a color in display P3. I click the little swatch. I get a new color picker, and here's RGB and A, and I can edit those just as if they were channels in another color space. So then we also have gamut boundaries. A gamut boundary line has also been added, drawing a line between sRGB and display P3 gamuts, making it clear which gamut the selected color is within. Very cool. So this color is very much in the P3 gamut and the peak vibrancy of this hot pink. Definitely a color I would make. Oh yeah, that's R1 and B1. That's my favorite P3 color to make. This helps authors visually differentiate between HD colors and non-HD colors, and it's especially helpful when working with the color function and the new color spaces because they're capable of producing both non-HD and HD colors. If you want to check which gamut your color is in, pop up the color picker and see. Very much. All right, converting colors. DevTools has been able to convert colors for a while with HSL, HWB, RGB, and hex for many years. You just shift click the square, the color swatch square in Styles Pane to perform this conversion. The new color tools don't just cycle through the conversions, though. They yield a pop-up where authors can see and pick the conversion they want. Here, check out this video. Right, so here I am converting. You can either shift click to get that menu, or you can click it here from the color picker. And here I'm converting to the color function, to the display P3 color space. So this is going to convert colors from all the different color spaces supported for you right there in the browser. Very powerful. Also notice, well, here I think we go into it next. When converting, it's important to know if the conversion was clipping to fit the space. DevTools now has a warning icon to tell you the converted color that alerts you to this clipping. So you can hover over the icon and says, this color was clipped to match the format's gamut. The actual result was this. Look, 274, 267. RGB doesn't support higher numbers than 255, so it had to get clamped down to 255, 255. It also doesn't support negative numbers. So interesting. Conclusion. If you made it this far, kudos to you. You now know color more than most other people on the planet. Conclusion is non-SRGB color spaces on the web are in their early days, but I believe we'll see an increase in usage from designers and developers over time. I do firmly believe that we will see increased usage. This stuff is powerful. It has power in more ways than one. Knowing which color space to build a design system on, for example, is a strong tool to be in a creator's tool belt. Each color space offers unique features and a reason it was added to the CSS specification, and it is okay to start small with these and add as needed. Enjoy playing with these new color toys, more vibrance, consistent manipulations, and interpolations, and overall deliver a more colorful experience to your users. If you thought that was interesting and you want to do deeper reading, here's a whole bunch more stuff. And thank you for sticking around for this live stream as the developer's director's cut, and I read this ginormous article. Take care, y'all. I hope that was interesting and informative, and leave a comment somewhere, and we'll talk about it. All right, see ya.